Did you ever see a man that likes a mask as much as him? If I were a psychiatrist, I'd say this guy's got some big issues.
He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu.
With 2 months to go for the US presidential election, the campaign is in high gear, and we at WION continue to bring you the latest on US election in collaboration with Voice of America. Hello and welcome to WION VOA co-production. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Now, President Donald Trump recently stirred the hornet's nest. He seemed to urge his supporters to vote twice, through mail and in person. It was his way of ensuring that all precious votes get counted. But voting more than once is illegal. As expected, the president's comments were slammed by critics, including Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. Here's the report by VOA's Patsy Widakuswara from Biden's home state of Delaware.
Trump supporters were energized during a rally in Wilmington, North Carolina, where President Donald Trump appeared to make a controversial suggestion: to vote by mail and then go to a polling station and possibly vote again.
And if on election day or early voting, that is not tabulated and counted, you go vote. And then if for some reason after that, it shouldn't take that long, it comes in, they're not going to be able to tabulate it because you will have voted. But you have to make sure your vote counts.
Trump, who has previously said voting by mail leads to voter fraud, reiterated his message via a series of tweets, which Twitter has labeled as violating its civic integrity policy for encouraging people to potentially vote twice. Voting more than once is illegal in the U.S. Most states are encouraging voting by mail as a safe and secure method during the pandemic. Trump's remark was condemned by critics, including Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, who accused Trump of undermining the American election system.
I think it's all designed to create so much chaos that no matter what the outcome of the election is, that it's thrown up in the air. I mean, that must be his reason, because, I mean, he says and does things that no other president that I'm aware of in American history has ever done. And we all go, well, there's another ridiculous, illegal, inappropriate thing he said.
White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany defended Trump's statement.
The president wants enfranchisement, not disenfranchisement. That's his goal with the comments that he made.
But election officials and analysts are concerned about the potential impact on polling stations.
I think what the president and what the press secretary are missing is the chaos that a significant number of people who have already cast their absentee ballots showing up at the polling place will mean, because the polling places themselves are not set up to handle, a significant influx of provisional ballots. What it yields is a longer process for check-in, which means longer lines, and those individuals aren't going to get the information they wanted anyway.
Facebook said it would take down posts containing video of Trump's remarks on voting twice unless the posts correct the record about voter fraud. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
So Voice of America's Nova Poerwadi joins us live from Washington, D.C. with his balanced analysis. Let's quickly go across to Nova. Nova, a very good evening to you. Hope you're doing good and enjoying the election fervor. It seems more and more voters will be voting by mail this election. What's your assessment?
Well, yes, and many states and other territories, including Washington, D.C., have sort of had a dry run of this vote by mail. A lot of the primaries and also caucuses that were usually conducted in person at the polling booths were conducted by mail, mostly, in many states that had primary voting in March onwards, when lockdowns and stay-at-home orders were first enacted. And this continue somewhat a trend of an increase in mail-in voting and also early voting. It's part of it is also because elections in the U.S., especially presidential elections, are held on the first Tuesday of November. Now, this harks back to America's agrarian roots, and Tuesday was the easiest day for farmers to take the day off and vote. But it's no longer the case. A lot of people cannot take the day off. It's not a federal holiday, and it's only a holiday in certain states like New York. So a lot of people cannot vote on November 3rd, and so they decide to vote early and sometimes by mail-in. Places like Washington, D.C. have sent out a notice, the D.C. Board of Elections, that every registered voter in Washington, D.C. is getting their ballots sent to them right away. They can either mail this back or they can drop it off at an open polling booth. But of course, Washington, D.C. only has some 500,000 voters, right. So this is something easy for them. Other states require you to demand or ask for a ballot, Akansha.
Very interesting to hear that bit from you, how people can actually choose to vote in earlier than the rest. But also, Nova, why is voting by mail causing such a partisan divide and such a polarized election?
Well, there's a perception, and this is among both sides, that mail-in voting, because it makes it so much easier, would increase turnout. And this increase in turnout would benefit their opponent. Now, President Trump thinks so because he thinks that this will disadvantage Republicans and give the edge to Democrats. But some Democrats also fear that an increase in mail-in voting and an increase in participation will also benefit Republicans. What does the research say? A lot of studies have been made on this, and especially with the increase in mail-in voting, it does seem to boost turnout in some states. But whether it gives a partisan edge is something that most studies say it does not. One recent study by Stanford University does confirm there's a modest to significant increase in voter turnout, but most of these have been in key groups, including young voters. And we also have another report, Akansha, which shows that not all young voters are Republican. So, this is a concern among both sides to varying degrees. But the research does not indicate a partisan edge or advantage in mail-in voting and turnout, Akansha.
Right, there's so much to talk about as far as voter turnout is concerned, and I'm going to come back to you to discuss more on that. For now, let's take in a report by one of our colleagues at Voice of America. Now, the focus of campaign ads and rallies in the run-up to the election is in battleground states like Wisconsin, a state which Donald Trump won by a narrow margin back in 2016. Like Wisconsin, there are states in which both candidates have a chance to win the Electoral College votes in November. Organizers are working to register voters amid ongoing racial unrest and the global coronavirus pandemic. VOA's Kane Faribaugh reports.
It is the first week of classes at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where Evan Carabas the school year impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic in stride.
I took 2 online classes from my apartment. Nothing too intense.
But 60 days before the November election, Carabas finds intensity in his volunteer work with the Badger GOP, a college Republican group helping to re-elect President Donald Trump and elect other candidates on the ballot in Wisconsin.
We're getting out there as much as we possibly can, knocking doors, doing phone calls and all of that.
Opinion polling conducted in the weeks after the political party conventions shows little movement as former Vice President Joe Biden continues to lead President Trump in this key battleground state.
We're never expecting them to really be favorable to him, especially since, a lot of conservative voters are afraid to even pick up the phone and honestly say who they're going to vote for.
It's going to be very close. It's really going to be about how many voters can you reach.
Rihanna Mukherjee is on the other side of the political aisle from Carabas, but as the leader of the University of Wisconsin College Democrats, is also engaged in a high-intensity get-out-the-vote campaign done virtually and by phone amid the pandemic.
People are tuned in and they'll start to pay attention once their phones are starting to buzz. Hey, are you registered to vote? Hey, did you request your ballot? Let's do it now.
I think I'm up to almost 10,000 phone calls on my app. So there's that. And then I just started doing doors not too long ago. I've only done, I think, probably less than 1,000, but I anticipate it'll be a couple thousand by the time it's all said and done.
While both Carrabis and Mukherjee admit current events in Wisconsin, such as the U.S. government response to the coronavirus pandemic and unrest in the city of Kenosha, could change the outcome of opinion polling as the election draws near, it isn't changing the way they engage potential voters. An election day that will be a first for both Mukherjee and Carrabis. While they support different candidates and different policy positions, it is their first opportunity to cast a ballot in a general presidential election. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Madison, Wisconsin.
Well, it's going to be quite interesting to see how the swing states behave. Let's get in a sense of perspective from Nova on battleground states. Nova, why is it that the outcome of U.S. presidential election often hinges on states like Wisconsin and other battleground states?
Well, Akansha, a lot of commentators will tell you, especially approaching the elections, that the U.S. elections is not a popularity game. It's because the popular vote, of course, counts, but it doesn't determine the winner. It's an electoral college game, and the electoral college votes are awarded by a winner-take-all system in all but 2 states and territories. Maine and Nebraska split their electoral college votes. States like Wisconsin are key, and Wisconsin is an interesting case because prior to 2016, in 7 successive presidential elections, this was a solid blue or Democratic state. And so safe were the Democrats feeling about Wisconsin remaining blue that it is well known that the candidate in 2016, Hillary Clinton, didn't even make a campaign presence in Wisconsin, feeling it was safe. But of course, what turned out happening was it swung to Donald Trump, a Republican. And this is why such states, no one is taking anything for granted this time around. And you will see both Joe Biden and President Trump campaigning in such battleground states. Wisconsin, of course, the Democrats tried to make amends sort of by holding their Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee, but of course that ended up being online instead of physically in Milwaukee. Other battleground states include Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, Colorado. Mm-hmm. These are states which don't necessarily provide like a firewall,
right,
because of the overwhelming number of partisans in the state. So they are the ones that will decide the election, as they have in previous elections. And President Trump this week alone is hitting 5 of those states, including Nevada and also North Carolina, Akansha.
5 of those states. Now, Nova, they say curiosity killed the cat, and yet I'm going to ask you this one. Based on poll results, who's favored to win in battleground states this year?
Well, according to national polls, Joe Biden is leading, but of course, as I mentioned, national polls determine popularity as a whole nationwide, and it's not a popularity contest. So in the battleground states, he still leads, but the margins are rather razor thin in some states. He still has to convince a lot of these voters to vote for him, and the coronavirus, while it's providing a boost to the Democratic cause, is also hampering Democrats' efforts to outreach, because they don't knock on doors as much as Republicans do. They have mostly an online presence, and also Joe Biden tends to have these limited socially distanced gatherings instead of the mass rallies that President Trump has, that sort of energizes the base and encourages people to vote for him. Now, one key will be turnout. Turnout are the 3 most important things, according to analysts, because in the U.S., turnout is relatively mild. In the last election in 2016, turnout was at 55%. If you compare to like the Indian elections, the last Indian elections, I believe the turnout was 67.
Yes.
Those are the high turnouts in other countries, but in the U.S., it rarely breaks half of registered voters. So a lot of analysts are now working into their models a model, a prediction of how things will shape up in battleground states with high turnout and also with relatively low turnout. Whose base is more energized? Do they care about the Senate race? 33 senators are up for re-election. Do they care about the balance of the Supreme Court? These are things that may motivate voters. And will Republicans be more energized because they still have mass rallies and door-to-door campaigning, canvassing?
Right, and how much of an impact will the pandemic
we'll have to see that.
Yes, absolutely. And how much of an impact will the pandemic have on the voter turnout? That's going to be one key factor as well. Thank you so much, Nova, for bringing us all your precious inputs. We'll keep coming back to you as you map all these developments throughout the run-up to the election.